It was at a time that I was living in New York that I really started noticing the disconnect between us as consumers, particularly in these large cities, the disconnect with nature, the disconnect with seasonality, and the lack of availability of really quality and flavorful product. And all of that kind of came together years later, about 5 or 6 years later, to what is Natoora today.
How do you feel about transforming the food system? Today's guest, Franco Fubini, is the founder of Natoora, a produce wholesaler and retailer founded 20 years ago in London and with outposts now in New York, Paris, Copenhagen, and now Melbourne. Natoora's explicit aim is to revolutionise the supply of fruit and vegetables in order to shape the future of food for the better. Sounds big. Franco, welcome to Australia, and thanks for joining me on Dirty Linen today.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
So what is the problem with the food system the way it is?
I guess the problem started back in the 50s with the advent of supermarkets, and it led us on a path to industrializing our food system. So on the ingredient side, we mass produce things like fruits and vegetables by way of very large scale industrial agriculture. And then the second component of that is that we highly process a lot of the food that we then consume. Anything that, or a lot of the things that we consume that are packaged or processed, even things like nut milks are highly processed. So ultimately, what that's done to us is, at a biological or human level, we have reduced a tremendous amount of nutritional density from our food, which is obviously not healthy for us. Also, the highly processed food has, again, negative impact in terms of our health. And it also, the way that we produce this food, particularly again at the ingredient level, so the farming of, be it protein or vegetables, is very damaging. When we do it in this industrial context, we damage the soils, and we therefore damage the environment and a lot of the planet in doing so.
Yeah, well, none of that sounds easy to turn around. So where does Natoora come in? What are you guys trying to do?
I mean, you're totally correct. It's an incredibly ambitious objective, and I think that obviously it's something that we on our own cannot dream to tackle on our own. It's something that we can be a big part of. And the way that we approach it is we believe that through flavor, we can convince consumers to buy better and to eat better. So, in simple terms, if you have an amazing peach, ideally, that joy, that emotional connection is sufficient to get you to want to eat really good peaches. And then it's down to a company like Natoora to ensure that we're sourcing that peach. And generally, when you're talking about a product that tastes really good, you could argue that for the most part, that product is farmed in a way that is beneficial to the environment. It's not entirely correct, because you can use chemical agriculture to produce really good flavor. But generally, you're going to be looking at farming practices and farms that are far better than industrial farming. So the idea is that through flavor, you stimulate the right kind of demand with the consumer that can then be fed back into the farming system to go and source product and stimulate the farming of even more product that is farmed in a way that is in harmony with the environment, that supports, a healthy ecosystem, and that also produces nutritionally dense food. So it's all about stimulating the consumer.
And so what does Natoora actually do?
So what we do is if you think about the supply chain, so we do two very important things. On one side, we build very cool and unique supply chains that are mostly direct. So we provide transparency. We obviously focus on flavor and therefore farming practices. And we bring that product into central hubs. So we kind of bring that product into a city like Melbourne. And then what we do on the other end is we find the right types of customers, be those restaurants or end consumers, where we can get the customer to appreciate and value the product, pay the right price for it so that it can sustain this healthy supply chain, and essentially create a market and stimulate a market. And we do that through education. We do that through a lot of content, through a lot of research. So we connect the farming with the right consumer and build a very resilient and healthy supply chain. So very diverse set of farmers and very diverse set of customers that understand what we're trying to achieve altogether.
So in Melbourne, you've partnered with Kim from Northside Fruit and Veg, like a supplier that a lot of really good restaurants already have been working with. I know that like Kim Driver at Northside finds this partnership really exciting, and he's been a great voice for food in Melbourne for ages. So I'm so on board with anything that he thinks is great. But I also have to confess that I feel a little disappointed that we couldn't improve this food system locally, that we need people coming in from elsewhere. Like, why couldn't we do this ourselves? Like, what do you have that we couldn't manage locally?
I think you could do it locally, and Kim was doing it locally. I think it's more about, so my perspective is that we almost have a duty to partner with like-minded businesses, and there are very few of them in our space. And by our space, I mean distributors, restaurant distributors. So I think that whenever we find like-minded companies, which as I said is very rare, it's almost our duty. And going back to your comment about how how enormous the challenge is to really redesign or rebuild the food system. Hence, for me, this duty to partner with like-minded individuals because of the size of the challenge. So it's less about kind of the inability for Melbourne to do it on its own, and it's more about Kim and ourselves, Northside and Natoora, believing that together we can achieve more than independently. So ultimately, that really is what it's about. It's about going faster in many ways, and we don't have a huge amount of time. So the joining of forces gives us more strength. It gives us an ability to do more together.
Yeah, okay. Because I suppose some of the things that Kim's spoken to me about are, just things that are sort of invisible to the consumer, like an ordering system, the way that things can be picked and packed more efficiently. I guess some of those back-end operations that really do make a huge difference to businesses. I mean, are those the kinds of things that you're talking about?
Those are a component. So because we are further along on our journey than Northside, we have built a lot of technology and we have gained a lot of experience in going through the different phases that you go as a very kind of operationally heavy organization. So we can help Northside and Natoora Melbourne now. We can help the organization do away with a lot of the mistakes that we made and put in a lot of the processes and systems that we know enable the organization to scale faster. So that is fundamental, because obviously one of the things that we talk about a lot internally at Natoora and externally sometimes is the concept of financial sustainability. Right? It's great to be a business that at its heart is trying to make a positive impact on the world, but it needs to start with financial sustainability. We need to be able to pay our staff, we need to be able to pay our farmers, we need to have an economic model within the organization that sustains itself and that can generate the profits that can then be reinvested in furthering the mission. So what we can bring to Natoora Melbourne, to Northside here, through these operational improvements, through the expertise, the scale, is the ability to get to that kind of financial sustainability faster and be able to scale quicker through that.
And what about the prices that people need to pay to have this, I guess, this connected and ethical supply chain? Is it about educating people that maybe things need to cost more at times?
Absolutely. And I think they do. If you're going to farm in the right way with the current model that we have in around the world, unfortunately, farming the right way costs more than the industrial farming. I'd say that I think it's important to note that part of the reason for that is that we don't price in the way that our economy works. It doesn't force companies to price in the cost of externalities. So if an industrial farm produces a lot of chemical runoff and damages a waterway near it, we don't charge that company the cost of cleaning up that waterway. And therefore, the full cost of that cheap industrial carrot is fictitious, because ultimately we are subsidizing that by the state, and tax is actually paying for the cleanup of the environmental damage that they're causing. But anyways, that is where we are today. So ultimately, when you're farming in the right way, it costs more money. And it's fundamental that as consumers, and this goes both as consumers that are, when we buy product to cook at home, when we go and sit down at a restaurant, and also chefs as consumers, we all need to understand that if we want better quality food, we need to spend a bit more money on that food.
I mean, it's just, these are such big issues, and no one organisation or person can solve everything, but there is a certain amount of privilege in the way that this works. I mean, do you think capitalism and the way it functions in general is in any sense compatible with a concern for the environment and flow-on impacts?
It's a wonderful question. I've got to say I'm hopeful, and I guess I think that, is it compatible? It's questionable whether it's compatible in its current form. I think that I look at companies like Patagonia. I'm a big fan of Yvon Chouinard and what they've built at Patagonia. And I do think that capitalism is a system that we have, so we need to figure out the way that we can use it for good. And I do think that capitalism in the right hands can be a force for good. And I'm very hopeful of the younger generations that are coming behind us, that are growing up with a very different sense of the impact that their life choices have on the planet. And I believe that if you combine the power of changing choices, changing habits, changing approach to consumption with again, a change in how companies utilize the capitalist system to try and revert the state that we're in as a planet, which goes well beyond agriculture and into kind of climate in general, and other parts of our kind of weird consumption habits or excessive consumption habits. I do think that capitalism can be utilized in the right way.
So I know, Franco, that you use some of Natoора's profits for impact, perhaps in some of the ways that you're talking about and highlighting. Can you talk about what you do with some of the money that you make?
Yeah, so what we started doing a long time ago when we first became profitable, kind of things opened up for us. We started realizing, hey, we've got some resources, and all of a sudden we started encountering cases within our supply chain where someone wanted to walk away from the cooperative, right? So a farmer in Sardinia, he was the first farmer that we helped financially. A very small farmer, was tied into a co-op, and the co-op had him locked in a way that he couldn't get away from the cooperative. So he desperately wanted out, and we gave him the capital that allowed him to kind of buy himself out, essentially, out of the cooperative and regain his independence. So what we do is we support farmers by way of providing them capital to enable them to scale, to enable them to build pack houses, acquire land. And we do that with farms that we believe are farming in ways that are beneficial to the planet and producing really great product. So that is one of the biggest uses of capital, is just supporting people within our farming network. We also, during COVID, came up with an idea of building, or setting up, more than building, a farm fund, which allows us to raise money and utilize also some of our profits, but also go out and raise capital through events and other avenues, which we then can grant. And we decided to utilize the farm fund specifically for young farmers under 35. Because there's a real gap. Young farmers are very underrepresented in most of the regions. So that is a way of providing essentially free money to farms. And then the third thing that we do is we set up our own farms. So we have 2 farms, one in Sicily and one south of London that we're just, we actually moved it from Cornwall to London, or sorry, to the south of London near Guildford. So that is being set up as we speak. So we should be planting in the spring.
Wow, it's very exciting. I love this young farmer focus. Have you got a success story, a story that you're really proud of?
I mean, it's very early days, but we Charmaine earned our grant in the UK. Because we did part in the UK and part in France, but in the UK, Charmaine did, and she's a wonderful young farmer. She's farming. She managed to get just a couple of acres, not too far from London in Buckinghamshire. And she's producing some beautiful, beautiful produce. The really cool thing is that what we do with the Farm Fund has nothing to do with our supply chain. So we don't, when we gave the grant to Charmaine, she didn't work with Natoora. She was just, farming and selling her product locally. And then this year, we started sourcing from Charmaine some amazing product. And I thought that was a really beautiful story. And hopefully we can support her to continue growing. She's farming in a very holistic way with very little soil intervention, which is something that's very cool and something that a lot of young farmers are doing here in Australia as well, in Victoria particularly.
I'd love to talk to you about flavour a bit more, because I know that that's, I guess the selling point of Natoora is that the produce that you source and sell is flavour first. But I feel like that's putting a lot of trust in consumers to know when, the peach or the broccoli or whatever isn't as delicious as it could be. How do you sell this idea of choosing food for flavour?
I mean, some of it needs to be done face-to-face to some degree, right? It needs to be done whether it's in a store or whether it's at an event, or, it could be in partnership with a restaurant. But obviously nothing can beat tasting the product. The other thing that we do when we can't get in front or get the product in front of a customer is we spend a lot of time on developing content. And we are very, I'd say there's a lot of depth to Natoora, and there's a lot of depth to our hunger for knowledge. Like we like to be able to go very deep in our knowledge, because we feel that if you're selling a product that is a high quality product, you need to back that up with high quality service. And part of that is also the fact that you need to be knowledgeable in what it is that you're selling. So naturally, we do gather a lot of information, and we're very hungry for knowledge, as I said. So we try and convert that into content that reaches the different consumers. So we speak in a certain way to the chefs, and then we speak a different way to consumers to try and express how we achieve flavor, or how a farmer achieves flavor in that specific product, and ways that you can search for flavor. So we did a campaign, for example, on scarring, and looking at, particularly peaches and nectarines and the scarring that they get, and how scarring is actually a sign of flavor and quality. So we can do that through, again, I guess, good content development, but ultimately there's nothing like tasting the product.
Scarring, like on the fruit itself? What is that?
Exactly. So scarring can happen for a number of reasons. It happens in apples as well. You would have seen it. Part of it is varietal. So, you'll have some apples that actually naturally develop some scarring, some kind of russeting that you see, which you don't tend to see in a lot of the fruits that make it onto supermarkets, right? Where what we've done is we've bred a lot of those peculiarities out of the fruits, because supermarkets were asking for fruits that to them looked perfect, which to me look actually unnatural. Scarring can also happen when for example, a branch scratches a fruit in its early development. So it kind of just scratches the skin, and then that part of the skin gets a bit broken, and then it kind of creates a scar the same way that our skin does, and then as it grows, you've retained the scar. Particularly in nectarines, but in a lot of fruits, a lot of the scarring, which is a lot of the spotting that you see, is also high concentrations of sugar. High concentrations of sugar create some of the scarring because they weaken the skin, or because it's where there's a high concentration of sugar, you get like a change of coloration and the way that it reacts to the sunshine. So all of this scarring, the way that I equate it is it's a great indicator of the character that's been built in a fruit, similar to if you take I don't know why I always think of a sailor who is out at sea a lot, their face would be in many ways a lot more interesting and intriguing to us, because it would be kind of quite sun scarred, and it would have a lot of life would be present on that face in a way. And I think that character is the same of what is reflected in fruit. So scarring is a fantastic indicator of quality and flavor. So if you're ever selecting a peach or a nectarine, find one that has scars, because you're almost guaranteed to get better flavor out of it.
That's such a radical paradigm shift to think about produce as having character rather than being perfect, because supermarkets have really trained us into looking for these supermodels lined up identically in rows on the shelves. So I love it, but it feels like there's a lot of retraining to do of humanity to appreciate things for their difference. But it's a journey, I guess.
Yeah, completely. I think you're right. There's a huge amount of retraining and re-education that needs to happen. And as you say, that kind of uniformity is totally counter. I mean, it would be incredibly eerie if we all looked the same, and all had the same hair color, and I mean, it's not natural. It's not the way nature behaves to have that kind of uniformity.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Something I sort of, wrestle with when I think about this stuff is this idea of like the problem with nostalgia, because I think when a lot of people would think, okay, supermarkets are not great. There's a lot of problems with the way food is farmed and with the supply chain and where the money goes. So we know we shouldn't be perhaps doing a big shop there, but it's, but then the farmers market feels like this very nostalgic kind of, this one-on-one relationship, which I love. It's great, but it doesn't necessarily work for farmers who have to, truck their produce around personally from place to place. And then, we concurrently have this idea that scale is evil, and it takes us away from, the source of things. Tech is impersonal. But, I mean, I know that you're using tech and scale to, in some ways, return to this idea of, imperfect produce that has heaps of flavour. But do you find that a tricky sort of balance when nostalgia is so much a part of the way people think food perhaps should be?
Yeah, it is a tricky balance, and I'd say that it's a tricky balance, particularly with the market and with consumers. I say that the market is in the kind of ecosystem and the thoughts that people have on sometimes what we do and whether Natoora is big or not big, and so. It definitely is about striking a balance. I do agree with you that I think there is this nostalgia, and it is important to be local, and I believe a lot in community and the power of community to get us back to a better place and in better harmony with nature. But at the same time, there's a lot of us on the planet. We consume a lot of food, and you need a system that is scalable if we're really going to enact change, because those industrial farms exist for a reason, and it's because we need to produce a huge amount of food. I don't believe that industrial farms are the answer, but also super tiny, local farms and all of us shopping at a farmer's market is just not going to cut it either. That's way too much on the other extreme. So we need to find that balance. And that balance, as you say, requires an element of scale, and it requires an element of utilizing technology to help stimulate or to be a component of changing the food system. I don't think that technology in itself can revolutionize the food system, but it's an enabler of it, and it helps get us into a better place.
So, Franco, what took you into this work? What drove you to found Natoora?
Always had a connection to food. And I guess my grandfather was an entrepreneur, and I never, I guess, as a, very young and immature, I always thought, oh, I'm going to do something on my own. And later on in life, I realized that just thinking it and saying it, and just because there was some of that in my family, it wasn't going to happen. So there was a component of wanting to do something entrepreneurial, and starting a business, and then there was another piece where I had a very close connection with food that was very instinctive. I think a lot of it came from, or comes from my father, who is a is a great cook and had a lot of passion for it. Even though we didn't live together because my parents got divorced at an early age, I think that a lot of that came from him. But I cooked a lot as I was getting into university, and when I started living in New York and my first job in banking. And over time, those two things kind of came together, this desire to do something on my own, and this realization that what I needed to do was actually do something in food, because it was the one thing that I didn't get bored about, and get bored of. So I combined the two, and it was at a time that I was living in New York that I really started noticing the disconnect between us as consumers, particularly in these large cities, and the disconnect with nature, the disconnect with seasonality, and the lack of availability of really quality and flavorful product. And all of that kind of came together years later, about 5 or 6 years later, to what is Natoora today.
Right, interesting. And so, Natoora Melbourne has launched. What practical changes or differences could we expect, whether we're a farmer, we're a chef, or we're a diner?
So I guess we could start with the farmers. We've already provided some support to a farm here. They had some really bad flooding, so I think what we'll be able to bring to the farming community is a more proactive, and even a more proactive approach to the work that we all do in that part of the business. So more support, a little bit more engagement, and obviously continuing the great work that Kim has done over the last 6 years. So trying to go a little bit deeper in the way that we source, and that's by providing Natoora Melbourne with more time, or providing Kim, who at the moment is the primary sourcing individual. So being able to spend more time visiting farms. In terms of the chefs, I think that our technology is going to improve the level of service that we can provide. I think the app is going to be a really cool development. We hopefully will launch it in Q1. So we have this very neat ordering app which delivers a huge amount of content. So for me, it's more the content than the ordering. So it provides real-time information on products that are tasting really great, things that are coming out of season, how product is evolving, insights into farms. So it's a very, very useful tool to get a much deeper level of information. So I think that's going to be a really great tool for chefs. We're also going to be bringing some product that comes from abroad. So a lot of the product that you find here in Australia already, things like Italian olive oils and great anchovies. So we're going to be bringing in some products from our kind of international supply chain, which are on a boat somewhere, making their way onto here. So I think that's going to be very cool for chefs as well. And obviously, as we broaden our sourcing with the farms, that's going to impact the range of product that we have for chefs. And we hope to push a little bit harder on the consumer side as well once we get a little bit more settled. So we still do some home deliveries, but we want to push a little bit harder. And hopefully at some point, I would love to open up a store here in Melbourne. But that's probably not next year, maybe something in 2024.
I think the content that you speak about in the education, I dug around and found some of your newsletters, and I have to say it does bring it to life. There was one that really stuck with me. It was a pumpkin that was sweeter than a melon, and you spoke about how the farmer grew it and why it was so sweet, and then there was some ideas about how to use it. And so I imagine if you're a chef sort of flicking through what's available and what's seasonal, that you might see a product that you had never seen before. You didn't quite know how to use it. You weren't sure how it would fit in your menu. But then, when you have that deeper information, then perhaps you do see a place for it. I mean, is that sort of what you're going for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you kind of captured it right there. And I think that fruit and veg evolves weekly. Like it really changes. It's very different to, protein or fish. There's seasonality in all foods, but, fruit and veg is really a kind of daily, it's almost like a daily, we think about seasonality at Natoora as a 365, day continuum, not as like, winter, spring, summer, and fall. So for me, the more content that we can provide to chefs, the more information that we can provide to them that's really timely, the better service that we can provide, because it enables them to engage with the product in an even greater way. And I do a lot of cooking, and I think that's been fundamental to the way that Natoora has evolved and how different we are to our competitors. And I think in part because I spend a lot of time cooking with the products that we source, and even when I'm sourcing, having a very similar mindset to the way a chef approaches looking at a product. It's helped me think about how to source better and also how to communicate better to chefs.
And Franco, from your perspective on Australia, or certainly Victoria at this point, where do you think Australian food and farming sits?
I'd have to say that to me, it sits on par or right below where Europe sits. I certainly feel that it's quite far ahead from the United States in terms of, and I'm making broad generalizations of kind of where I find that in terms of range and quality of product, when I think about fruits and vegetables, I think that generally it's very, very close, almost on par with Europe, which I think is saying a tremendous amount, because to me, kind of Italy, France, and Spain, not to discredit a lot of other great farming countries, but those three, and then you have a couple cultures in Asia that do some fantastic farming, notably Japan. But those three really, the breadth of product and the quality of product is incredibly high in Europe, and I think Australia is very, very close to that. If not on par, which is also down to the incredible diversity of climates and microclimates that the country has.
Well, so long as we're feeding you well while you're here in Australia, Franco. It's been, really a real pleasure and so interesting to have you on the pod. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to touch on?
No, I think it's been really fun talking to you. The only other thing I could say is that it's my second time in Australia, and I've got to say that I was in Sydney for a day earlier in the week, and I genuinely incredibly impressed with the food scene here. I think it's I visit a lot of major cities around the world, and I've got to say that particularly Melbourne is up there with one of the best cities in the world in terms of what's going on. The quality of the chefs, the quality of the ingredients obviously plays a tremendous part, but even what you see beyond the restaurant scene, just what you see in terms of markets and products that people are producing, for retail, it's really, really fascinating what's going on here. So I'm very excited about being able to have a reason to come back here more often.
Great. Well, thanks for being part of it, and thanks for sharing with us today, Franco. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinenat.deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This